The United States, along with India and its allied partners, declares the establishment of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. Christian Hanelt, an expert on the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Foundation, said the U.S. is trying to establish a new kind of geostrategic order through this transport corridor to counter China's own ambitious Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative. Meanwhile, author Michael O'Sullivan believes that the new corridor could help India establish a powerful new economic center by collaborating with Gulf countries. Specifically, how might this work? This month, a group of 20 leaders summit in New Delhi witnessed a surprise announcement from the US, India, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union about a new railway and port project to create an India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, as a pillar of the G20's Global Infrastructure Hub initiative. According to the plan, the corridor will span 4,800 kilometers and consist of two separate branches. The eastern branch will connect India with Gulf countries, and the northern branch will link Gulf countries with Europe. The plan is a historic one, according to Saudi Investment Minister Al-Falid. People talk about the Silk Road, the spice route of India through the Arabian Peninsula, but this is going to be more significant and relevant because it's going to be about new energy, data, connectivity, human resources, aviation routes, and it's about aligning countries that are of the same mind and same vision, he said at the G20 meeting. Al-Khali's words are optimistic. The reality is that as much as the economic interests of the involved nations may be similar, they still differ in important areas, especially in political terms. The U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, John Fina, spoke in more realistic terms about the project. It would benefit low- and middle-income countries in the region and also enable the Middle East to play an important role in the global trade, he said during the G20 summit. But of course, there was more to the new trade corridor than trade, he noted. The plan is a huge opportunity building on our broad efforts over the last couple of years to turn the temperature down across the region, increase connectivity within the region, and address a conflict where we see it, Fina said. His words likely apply to the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia in particular, which has only just recovered from the reputational damage done by the 2018 murder of the Saudi government critic Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. On one hand, in promoting this trade corridor, the White House is trying to counter China's own ambitious Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative, said Christian Hanelt, an expert on the Middle East at the Bertelsmann Foundation. On the other hand, the U.S. is also trying to bring its partners in the Gulf closer. The U.S. is trying to establish a new kind of geostrategic order through a transport corridor into which the Middle East will be integrated. But this is likely to be a tricky undertaking, he added, because the countries that are to be signatories to the IMEC other than the Gulf states, Israel will also apparently be involved, are not really working according to the old geopolitical order, which lined the U.S. allies up against other groups headed by, for example, China or Russia. A rumored rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel can also be seen in this context. The Saudis would anticipate political benefits from that as well as further positives in the economic, technological, and security sectors. Furthermore, according to Mr. Hanelt, renewable energy poses a significant challenge for Gulf countries. On one hand, they want to ensure the oil export for the next 20 to 30 years. However, they also aim to lead in the transition to new energy sources. To achieve this, they need to collaborate with Europe. This is an advantage that many Middle Eastern countries would consider in the IMEC project. Not only the United States or the Middle East, but India is also believed to achieve significant benefits through the new economic corridor, especially it can enhance its influence and develop its economy. Why is that? Last week, Nikkei Asia published an assessment by expert Michael O'Sullivan regarding the new cooperation between India and Gulf countries. In this, it is suggested that New Delhi may join hands with Middle Eastern nations to establish a new economic center, thus further enhancing their global prominence. Michael O'Sullivan is the author of the book The Leveling: What's Next After Globalization, and currently holds a position as a managing partner at Harvest Innovation Advisory, an investment consulting firm. According to O'Sullivan, is now the consensus view that globalization and the form it took from 1990 to 2020 is over, and that a transition is underway to a multipolar world. From a geopolitical point of view, this multipolar world will likely be dominated by three significant players: China, the US, Latin America, and the European Union. They are each large, powerful, and have increasingly distinct ways of doing things. Much of the debate about the coming world order is consumed by discussion of these three poles, to the exclusion and likely irritation of other powers like India, Japan, and the UK. Amid the rise of India as a geopolitical player and economy, and the ongoing rapid and historic remaking of alliance across the Middle East, the key question is whether this infrastructure corridor bringing together India, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates could provide the makings of a bona fide fourth pole on the geopolitical landscape. To gauge the putative pole's changes, it's worth considering the characteristic of the world's existing three power centers. The first is what could be called a coherence mass. Europe, the US, and China have mass economically, financially, diplomatically, industrially, and militarily. By comparison, Russia is not a pole, as it is not significant economically or industrially and has a toxic foreign policy. India and Saudi Arabia, despite their economic potential, are not heavy hitters in terms of finance, even though Saudi Arabia has significant foreign exchange reserves. Building mass would take time and investment and would demand a strategic coherence from a very disparate countries. Currently, there are few policy areas where policy collaboration exists on a detailed and well-coordinated level between India and, say, the United Arab Emirates. The second and essential element of multipolarity is that each pole has a defined way of doing things. Europe is a liberal social democracy with increasingly coordinated policies. China has its China Dream social contract between the country's people and the Communist Party, and the US is making itself great again. Each pole has a distinctly different approach to technology, the internet, and lately to regulating artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, the players along the India-Saudi Arabia corridor are quite different, both in terms of development models and cultural. It's also too disparate to have a common policy. However, according to Mr. Michael O'Sullivan, this could evolve over many decades of cooperation and close ties in trade. The Indian communities in Kenya and the United Arab Emirates could exert significant influence. In the context of IMEC, this is a great deal of talk about the Global South, the fast-growing populous countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It does their individual cultures little justice to group them together, and the idea of the Global South vastly overestimates the ability of this country to act as a single entity. In the long run, it may be that the India-Saudi Arabia UAE corridor becomes the organizing locus for the Global South. These countries could take heart from the early days of the U.S., for example, the ways in which Alexander Hamilton bound individual states together during the 1791 Wesley Rebellion against national taxation, and the fact that the EU itself started off in 1952 as a trade and infrastructure project with the European coal and steel community. So, it's too early to speak of a functional fourth pole. India and its Middle Eastern peers need to be patient, study the history of the EU and the US, not overreach and concentrate on trading more together. A roadmap might start with a common secretariat and a small number of shared infrastructure projects, as well as perhaps pooled investment funds and common legal and corporate governance frameworks to allow the disparate countries to work together. An early institutional innovation might be a policy body that sounds out and tries to find areas of common alignment across popular emerging economies, and that strives to be a voice for this effort. If all that can be accomplished in the next 5 to 10 years, that might show the makings of a bona fide fourth pole exist. That's all for today. Thanks for your watching and see you tomorrow in the next World Affairs program.